both. So, how did you tell us how you got involved in film and what it's meant to you over these years?
Well, when I was a kid, I mean, we used to, the main part of entertainment was to go to the movie houses and see movies, and grew up going to the Saturday, day screenings of the different double features. Very fortunate that I was able to see all the great classics and all that stuff, on the big screen. And then from there, you just sort of, the presentation and the way films were done and things really impressed me that I wanted to do the same thing at home. I wanted to carry that at home. So then I got into film collecting, built my own theaters in my houses, from one place to another, and start doing the own thing, and became actually, from there, went actually into film production. So I was with film, and still continue to collect film, 16 millimeter primarily, and then up until the days of VCRs, which came in the 80s, and that was when I finally tore down the theater because nobody was coming to see it, because you could get the films within 6 months. The new films, you can get them out on tape. Every corner store, rent them and stuff, and you can get them real fast. And when you were collecting movies, 16 millimeters, depending on what you were getting, they were very expensive. Anywhere from $150 to $500 to $800, depending on what you were buying. So you couldn't go out and buy one of these a week. It's kind of expensive. In my situation, I was able to put at least maybe 1 or 2 films in my collection a year. That was all I could afford. And other guys had a lot more than I did. I usually kept about an average of 50 films, and that was it.
So one of the things that was great. You mentioned in answering that they were, these titles were rare to come by.
Right.
And one of the most vivid examples I can think of that, and I'd love you to tell the story, is of you showing a film to a very famous composer, a film of his we hadn't seen in many years.
When we were in Hollywood, I wanted to see Max Steiner. Max Steiner is considered the dean of movie music, and somebody I really admire tremendously. A lot of rumors have gone around saying that King Kong was the very first movie that had what they call they sort of term it a Mickey Mouse score, where you're actually following every little bit of action, the live action, with some sort of musical notes and stingers and what have you. They call that like Mickey Mousing. But actually, while Kong was being made, there was a film being made before that called Most Dangerous Game, in which Steiner did the same thing. He actually scored that film first. Not that many people know that. So when we finally got to his house, and when we banged on the door, at that particular time in Hollywood, there was a lot of people going around robbing a lot of the famous production people, so they were a little cautious about opening the door to strangers. But when we came in, and I grabbed his hand and said, "Mr. Steiner, so great to see you." I had The Most Dangerous Game, and as soon as he heard that, he knew I was legit, because I said, "I'll run that movie for you." And that was the film he hadn't seen in years. We had a 60mm print of that with us, so that sort of solidified us getting in there. And I spent the whole day with him. It was just great. It was a great time.
What a great audience for a 16mm film collector. I can't imagine a better audience for
Oh, he was fantastic. I was just sorry, we weren't exposed to what you have today, with all of the magazines and publicity and different information that's available. We had none of these horror magazines, sci-fis, all these different publications. I was never aware then of how insecure he was, or how he really didn't give himself too much credit. Now you know that because there's so much written about these people. But back then we didn't know. And he was very, very insecure. But at the time when I met him, he was in his early 80s. He only lasted a few years after I met him. So he was sort of on the downside, but what great music. A friend of mine, I can't think of his name right now, who is the curator of Max Steiner and Marion C. Cooper's work at UCLA, not UCLA, Brigham University. He's on the the DVD tapes of Kong, the new Kong that came out. I just can't think of his name right offhand. But anyway, he called me and he said to me, "Did he show you the leather manuscripts on Kong?" I said, "I never thought to ask." But they gave them to this fellow. So he had James the Ark, that's the man's name. He is a curator of the university that has all of Cooper stuff and some of the Steiner stuff there. And he was handed by Mrs. Steiner those leather-bound manuscripts of the original score.
Wow, wonderful. I just have to change it. I know. You comfortable?
Oh, fine.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to have you, because you did it so wonderfully well on the phone when we talked, is talk about how you replicated the experience of a Golden Age movie presentation in your booth.
Well, for me, I mean, when we used to go to, first of all, you know, you're coming from a mundane kind of a life, you know, you're not rich, you don't live in palaces and stuff like that. And when, as kids, when you go into these theaters back then, I mean, they were just beautiful, beautiful. They're like palaces, and you felt like you were just escorted into another world. And there's just a special feeling there. And then the presentation, the music coming on before the show, the dimming of the lights, and then of course they had red drapes or sheer drapes or whatever the case may be. And then they would open the drapes up and they would slowly start the movie. And the presentation was just great. Sometimes back then they would have the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and they would have the newsreel would come up and all that kind of stuff. And that just had a special feeling, you know. And if I was going to have my own theater at home, I was going to run 16mm, I wanted to duplicate that. So I wanted to get the, you know, the coming attractions titles and the different things and put them all together and have the drapes open up and do the same thing. And that's what I did. And a lot of people seem to enjoy that. The theater I had at home wasn't too small. It had a 10-foot wide screen, so it wasn't too bad, 4x10, so it wasn't too bad. We had Dolby sound, and we had a wide screen, so it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a little small thing. Mm-hmm. And the people seemed to enjoy it. It was like I remember when I ran Jaws. I mean, and of course, sitting by the projector and playing a little bit with the volume, you could really zap the people on certain parts. I mean, I had people flying out of their seats, you know, but I would literally do that just to...
So you were a showman.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching the people get out of something. I already know what was going on, but to watch them for the first time seeing something, I thought was great. So we enjoyed it.
When you think of all that's been gone, that's going away with this shift to digital, well, how does it make you feel? And
it's sad. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Of what's being lost with that shift, what is most significant?
Yeah, but I think throughout time, we were just saying about that at the restaurant, that just society, mankind in general, you have trades and careers that have their day, and then they slowly fade away. I mean, I'm sure the guy who was making the leather straps for the horse and buggy wagons was very upset when cars started coming in. All of a sudden, his trade just disappeared. When I grew up in the movie business, I was very fortunate. I got into the movie business professionally when they were doing 35mm black and white and color. We went from black and white, 35, 16mm, 8mm, super 8mm, videotape, and now digital. So I went through the whole gamut. But the labs, you had all these big labs in New York, and they're all gone. All that's gone. But you know, it's good things with digital, you know. But I don't know, there was just a romance and a feeling about the old way things were done. I feel bad that the kids today don't have a chance to experience that, but on the other hand, do they really care? So that's the whole thing.
Yeah. But obviously you're of a generation that does care, and when you stand in this theater, what does it evoke?
It brings back a lot of memories. It's like, in our day, my father and I were taking me into town, that we went to see Cinderella, and the line was 4 blocks long. Of course, he used to sneak us up. When people were talking, we'd sneak up a little bit and wait there, and sneak up a little bit. And I knew what he was doing, you know. And I remember, but the Cinderella was really funny because we finally got into the lobby of the theater, the Translux Theater on Chestnut Street here in Philadelphia. And we got into the lobby, and they closed the doors, and that was it. So we had to sit in the lobby now for another hour and 15 minutes until they opened up the doors and let you in. That's what you had to experience then, trying to get into the movies. And like, sometimes 4 or 5 people deep, a block, 2 blocks long. Not today. And of course, in those days, like I said, we had theaters. I'll probably be ridiculed for this, but today we have band boxes, which I call these little cement boxes that they call multiplexes and everything, which is not the same thing. So they lost a lot of atmosphere, a lot of a feeling there, I think, which I thought was great.
And this to you would be a theater?
This is a theater. Although even when I started going to the theaters, especially the neighborhood theaters and things, not so much the downtown theaters, but the average theater like this is, a neighborhood theater, they were just starting to get a little rough around the edges. They were starting to fail a bit. They still had the glory and the power and the feeling of going into these very ornate houses, but they were starting to fail. And by the 60s and 70s, they were becoming very shabby. It's a shame. But it's a lost art. It's like some of the other things that have come and gone. So
wonderful.
Can't change this progress in society, and I mean, moving ahead, that's advancement. You can't change that. So, but it doesn't mean you can't miss it. You hate to give it up, but that's life. It happens.
And that's where you are in terms of you will be the last generation. You will mark the last generation of film collectors, but also film projectionists.
Well, right. I mean, even like the idea of just getting a clip and doing a splicing of two pieces of film together and the glue. And talking to one of the other fellows here who's still very much involved in film, and it must be awful hard to get all these supplies. I mean, years ago you can get them anywhere, but today getting reels, splicing tape, hot splicers, guillotine splicers, all these things that we used to have second nature, must be pretty difficult to get hands. I guess there are places you can get them, but it's going to be projection bowls. He mentioned that you have to buy them in cases because they're so expensive. And so I think in that respect, trying to get these things that are very, very limited around now is kind of hard and expensive, I think, to keep the hobby going. But you can't bring back the glory of the past, unfortunately. And like they keep saying, the glory days of Hollywood. Okay, you can't bring those days back. One of the saddest things for me is when Kodak went out of business. My God, I mean, whoever thought you'd live through the day to see Eastman Kodak go out of business, but they're out of business.
So what is it you want to know about presentation?
Well, my feeling was, remember when we were talking a little while ago, you and I were talking about how you came here and watched movies, and there was a certain style of presentation, the opening of the curtain.
Yeah.
There was a grandeur in a way that's not here. And maybe if you could just tell us about some of your earliest memories, and maybe some of the films you saw with your dad here, and how that presentation was.
I didn't see too many films with him here.
Oh,
I was always going to the matinees with my friends as a kid.
Right.
And
so what was that like? What was the presentation like as a kid?
It was crazy. I mean, the whole place was filled with kids. Can you imagine what that was like? I mean, it was popcorn flying through the air, that kind of thing.
So very early memories for you in this theatre.
Yeah.
And here you are.
Way back.
I'm sorry, I stepped on you there. So some really early, primal memories for you.
Yeah. First time I got to leave the house as a kid, as a young boy, was to come here. Because they knew where I'd be. If they needed me, they knew where to find me. It wasn't like, they just set me free and, didn't know where I was. And, they knew at a young age how much I loved this stuff.
Yeah. And so here you are now, many, many years later. Not to age you, of course. Many years later, and we've just seen the end of film presentation here.
It's heartbreaking.
I'm sorry, I stepped on you there.
It's heartbreaking. I'm going to miss it.
So you're here at the end?
Pretty much, yeah.
And how was it today? How did it feel today to be with all these people and to hear?
It feels great. And it brings back a lot of memories. I mean, I spent a lot of years watching a lot of films. I mean, a lot of films, whether it's 16 millimeter at home or 35 millimeter on the big screen. Well, there used to be a screen here.
And now it's over.
Yeah. I'm going to miss the cue marks, the cigarette burns as they call them, and the scratches and splices. And it's not the same. I mean, it's prettier to not see that stuff, but it's nostalgic for me anyway.
And you miss the light pouring out of the projector.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I always liked that. I mean, you couldn't see it too much because they wouldn't allow cigarette smoking, but when people were smoking in the theater, you could see the smoke billowing up through the beams of light, which I always thought was a cool image.
Of course, now it is. Here's your cue. The dying of the light.
Oh, yeah. That would be the dying of the light. Yeah, you're right. Ah, man. What the future is going to hold. I mean, how long is this digital material going to last? I mean, they didn't make the films to last, so who knows on the digital.
Great. I think
does that work?
I think we've got some good stuff there.